Good evening, everyone. My name is Elliot Rana, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard Library, and the Harvard Division of Science, I am so pleased to welcome you to tonight's event with Nikolay Kukushkin, presenting his new book, One Hand Clapping, Unraveling the Mystery of the Human Mind. He'll be joined in conversation tonight by our very own Melissa Franklin. Tonight's event will conclude with some time for your questions, followed by a book signing and personalization here at the front of the hall. To ask a question, just raise your hand during the Q&A portion, and myself or a colleague will come meet you with a microphone. For the book signing, we'll have books available for sale at the back of the hall, and we'll direct you where to line up after the talk. This event is a part of the Harvard Science Book Talk series, an ongoing collaboration between our store, the Division of Science, and the Harvard Library. We host multiple events per semester here at the Science Center and elsewhere, so please check our website for the latest information on the series. And now, I want to take a moment to thank you for buying books from Harvard Bookstore. Your purchases support our many event series and help to ensure the future of a local union bookstore as we wrap up our fall series. And lastly, a quick note to silence your cell phones or anything else that might make noise for the duration of the talk. And now, I'm so pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Nikolay Kukushkin is a Russian-born neuroscientist based in Brooklyn. He holds a bachelor's degree in biology from St. Petersburg State University, a doctorate in philosophy and biochemistry from Oxford University, and received his postdoctorate training here at Harvard Medical School. He's currently a clinical assistant professor of liberal studies at New York University and a research fellow at NYU's Center for Neuroscience, where he studies the molecular, cellular, and evolutionary foundations of memory formation. An earlier version of this book, first published in Russian, won the most prestigious book prize for Russian nonfiction, the Enlightener Award, as well as the Alexander Belyaev Medal, awarded to the best Russian language, nonfiction, and science fiction. He'll be joined in conversation tonight by Melissa Franklin, Malinkrot Professor of Physics and Director of Graduate Studies in Physics here at Harvard University. Tonight, they're here to discuss One Hand Clapping, Unraveling the Mystery of the Human Mind. Science says that you are nothing but a chemical reaction, a collection of atoms and molecules, like rocks, paper clips, and everything else in the physical universe. But if that's so, where is the place in this world for your consciousness? In a word, why does it feel so special to be you? A work of ambitious intellectual scope, and in the words of Melissa Franklin, the best book we have ever hosted in this series. One Hand Clapping is distinguished as much by its originality as by its breadth of imaginative reach, drawing from neuroscience, evolution, philosophy, and a rich tapestry of cultural references, all brought to life by Kukushkin's own illustrations. Told with the drama and daring of a mythical epic, it reaches deep into our oceanic past to show for the first time how in the entire course of Earth's history, from the earliest non-living particles, ultimately led to the formation of our minds. We're so pleased to host this event here at the Harvard Science Center tonight. Please join me in welcoming Nikolay Kukushkin.
It's great to be here, back in Boston. The weather is cold, but thank you for the warm reception. It's great to be here again. I saw this meme the other day. Beavers are one of those things you just accept without question as soon as adults tell you about it as a kid. And then many years later, in your adulthood, you look up one day and go, wait, what do you mean there exists a species of rodent hydrological engineer that knows how to build properly ventilated freestanding houses for itself? That doesn't make any sense. And I thought to myself, this is how I think about everything in science. And what I think is interesting about this meme specifically is the word question here. It's because it's fundamentally about how amazing beavers are. But you recognize that the moment you can ask this question, the moment you see that there's some mystery in this beaver. And this really reminds me of this quote from Einstein that I really love: the most mysterious thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. He to whom the emotion is a stranger, who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead, his eyes are closed. It's the sense of mystery that makes the beaver special, and I think that sense of mystery is what I want to bring to our understanding of ourselves. That's how I feel when I think about what it means to be myself. So this is where I come to the title of the book, One Hand Clapping. I first heard this Zen koan. So a koan is a riddle without a solution. It's a Zen paradox that you're supposed to ponder on and think about, and that will lead you to a right frame of mind. So I first heard it in college. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Two hands come together and make a sound. What is the sound of one hand clapping? And at that time, it was all a big joke. We all walked around and did this, and I all thought it was all very pretentious and forgot about it for many years. Until I found myself in a neuroscience lab staring at neurons in petri dishes. And when you do that, when you study processes like memory or cognition in something like a culture of these cells that are talking to each other, you start wondering, what is the difference between this petri dish and myself? Is my brain not the same kinds of neurons? Isn't the process that leads to memory formation in my brain the same kind of process that leads to memory in these cells? And if so, where exactly is the line between me and the rest of the world, between my own experience and what I am experiencing? And that's where I went back to this koan of one hand clapping. It suddenly made sense to me. The two hands must come together for experience to happen. It's me and non-me, myself and the rest of the world. And intuition tells us those two things have to come together for us to experience anything. But anytime we try to zero in on what these two hands are, we can't quite find where does one transition into another. And so you wonder, what is the sound of just one hand clapping? What could the sound be if there is no boundary at all? So my approach to this question is different from, I think, how most people approach questions of such philosophical magnitude, is because I was trained as a molecular biologist, as a biochemist even. And so when I think about things like consciousness and agency, meaning of life, I start by thinking from the ground up, from molecules and cells, and I try to understand, how do those cells and molecules and the small components, how do the small things arrange themselves into bigger and bigger and bigger meanings? How can we build up philosophical concepts from the ground up? I call this approach molecular philosophy. Not because I philosophize about molecules, although I do plenty of that, but because I build up these abstract philosophical concepts from the ground up. So let me tell you what I mean by that, and where this approach might illuminate something that would be mysterious otherwise. We think of chemical elements as basically numbers in the periodic table, pieces of data. We don't think of them as having any special powers or any special abilities. But they do. There are inherent properties in chemical elements, such as carbon and oxygen, that define what these elements are. For example, carbon is a uniquely cooperative chemical element. It can make up to 4 bonds with other atoms. It's a lot. It's more than most can do. And it can bond with other carbons, which is also very rare. So in its chemical nature, and that's written into the periodic table of elements. In this chemical nature, this number is this wonderful ability of this element to create complexity, to create complex things. Everything in nature that grows or branches or expands, anything new that is created, comes out of that original ability that is built into that atom. Compare that to oxygen. another important component of life on Earth. Oxygen is a totally different atom, completely different character. Oxygen is a ferocious element. Oxygen destroys. Carbon builds, oxygen destroys. Oxygen rips apart any chemical bond that it sees, and second only to fluorine and how powerful it is in ripping apart those chemical bonds, releasing copious amounts of energy. That's what combustion is. So here we have on the left piece of an organic molecule made out of carbon, and there's some hydrogens there as well. And then oxygen molecules attack that could be maybe a piece of glucose or some sugar there, attacking it and ripping it apart. And that could describe combustion as a piece of wood burning. It also describes our metabolism. Our metabolism consists of these two arms, the buildup of large molecules from small components, thanks to carbon, and the breakdown of those large molecules into smaller components that releases energy, thanks to oxygen. It's the cycle of creation and destruction that is built into each of our organisms. But at its core, it boils down to something very, very simple that's independent of our judgment, that's independent of our interpretation, that just exists in the world as a pattern of this world. And that's what I call essences in the book. It's an idea that exists embedded in the very structure of the world. It's not a human idea. You don't need a human to have that idea. It's an idea that is embedded in nature itself. And I use this word essence in the book to distinguish between ideas of our brain, the ideas that we humans have, that we think of, and these ideas that are embedded in nature, like the idea of constructive carbon and destructive oxygen. So this ground-up perspective allows us to see nature for what it really is. And when you ignore this perspective, if you ignore the different characters of atoms of carbon and oxygen, you don't fully understand where metabolism is coming from. And you're also missing out on a lot of fun in how we perceive nature. Let me give you a little bit of a more complicated example of how this molecular philosophy approach, the bottom-up approach, how it can illuminate more complicated things, concepts from our mind. I study memory, but when our lab showed that kidney cells can form memory in much the same way as brain cells do, most people, most readers, most reporters put this word memory in quotation marks. You see, remember, memory-like processes, remember in scare quotes, learn, memory. Why exactly is this a quotation mark memory? Well, the memory in a kidney cell is not how we think about memory when we close our eyes and think about yesterday. That's top-down. That's a top-down view. That's you starting from your memory and then trying to understand how does that work? Well, it's not in my kidney. It's not in my kidney cell, so that must be some other kind of memory. But what is this memory that we perceive as our own, as real memory without quotation marks? What is it from the perspective of a brain? I like this cartoon. I show it to my students as just a general introduction into what does a brain do. You can think of it as this maze that inputs experience from your eyes, your ears, all your sense organs, everything that's happening to you. And then those signals from all of those organs, they bounce around the brain in some complicated route, and then they come out as behavior, as your movements, as what you do, what you say, where you go. So the brain is a device that converts one into another, that determines what will be this routing of a signal from input to output. So a memory, from this perspective, is how the route of the signal changes in response to a pattern of experience. Something happened to this brain of this person, the routing has shifted, and now a different kind of behavior comes out of the same experience. That's what memory is. What if we go a little bit deeper? Again, we're moving from the top down. We started from how we think of memory, and we're moving a little bit deeper. What happens if we go now to the level of individual neurons? What does an individual neuron know about experience, behavior, memory? Well, nothing really. All that a neuron knows is patterns of chemicals arriving from other neurons. There's other neurons connected to it. They send their pulses of chemicals at different times, at different frequencies. Maybe there's several different neurotransmitters arriving from several different sources. That's it. That's all that a neuron inside a brain will ever know. And what is the behavior of that neuron? What does it do? It also produces neurotransmitters that it sends to another neuron. It could be producing more of them, less of them. It could be sending them to one neuron or another neuron, or more to this neuron or less to that neuron. But that's really all it does. And so what is a memory? What does that say, memory? From the perspective of that individual neuron, it's an internalized pattern. It is how this neuron has responded to the time patterns of the chemicals that it received, and how it produced the time patterns of the chemicals that it's sending out. What has changed in that neuron to convert one pattern into another? So that's what that mental memory is from the perspective of individual neurons in the brain. But this, what I just described to you, this is true for any cell. Every cell receives patterns of chemicals. Not necessarily neurotransmitters, but hormones, nutrients, salts, liquids, all sorts of signals passing through the body from other cells. A kidney cell might be hearing a signal from a neighboring cell. A liver cell might be hearing signals from the food that has been consumed. Cells are constantly bathed in different chemicals, and those chemicals come in patterns. And so each cell has the capacity to take that pattern of experience and convert it into a different pattern of what it does, or what sort of chemicals does it produce, and what sort of chemicals does it send to other cells. That is a memory from the perspective of this cell of the body. So what our research shows is that there is no biological difference between this neuron memory and a memory of every other cell in the body. They both produce these internalized patterns using the same genes, the same molecules, the same biological process that neurons use. To our body, there is no difference between these processes, between memory in a kidney cell, that just happens to be the cell that we study. It's not really important that it's a kidney cell, just important that it's not a neuron. It could be any other cell in the body. Between that memory and the memory that is stored in the brain. So when we look at it from the top down, we create these false dichotomies. We create a memory that is real and a memory in quotation marks that's not quite as real. And we puzzle over where does one end and the other begin. But if you look at it from my molecular philosophy, bottom-up perspective, these dichotomies dissolve. You see that there is no difference between these processes, that they are the same and they come from the same place. They're a continuous process that happens in all cells of the body. So this approach, it helps us dissolve dichotomies that we see when we look at our own mind, our body, at biology, at life, from the top down. And so maybe it is like this with all of consciousness. Maybe it is like this with all of the patterns that we internalize, with all of our mind. I want to give you an example here. Here's this little app that I vibe coded yesterday. So it generates a sound pattern, and it generates two versions of it. A random pattern from 2 to 8 notes, and then it generates random intervals, and it will play it in an ascending form and in a descending form. And you listen to them and you tell me which one sounds optimistic and which one sounds pessimistic. You know how ascending patterns and descending patterns sound. Any pattern that you will take will work like that. Why? Why is it? It's like that in pretty much every culture. Nobody told you about that. Why? Well, it could be cultural. There's video games that do that, cartoons that do that. That goes back to vaudeville times. Could be nature, could be nurture. But does it even matter which one it is? Because the big point here is that in this emotion, we have internalized this fundamental pattern of reality. Moving up means success. Moving up means resisting gravity. Moving up means effort that you put into something and succeeded in that, whereas down means losing control, means falling off a cliff, means succumbing to natural forces, means dissolving in this natural way that things are and losing your own personality in it. I'm expanding on this idea, but you understand where I'm going with this. It's not an idea that just exists in our mind. It's an idea that is embedded in the patterns of the world. And whether through genetics, or through culture, through nature, or through nurture, we have internalized that pattern and turned it into something that we perceive as elemental, as indivisible, as this personal and intangible, as this emotion of optimistic versus pessimistic. It is a pattern that really exists in nature, but that we perceive as our own, as special. Or let me show you another example here. Look at these images and think about which two animals would you put into one bin, and which two animals would you put into another bin? They're very different. Each one of them is unique. But I don't think you need to be a zoologist to see that two of them have 4 legs and 2 eyes and this tail, and they're vertebrates. And 2 of them have these tentacles and gills in the back, and they're mollusks. A child who knows nothing about animals or evolution would be able to do that, would be able to bin these 4 animals into 2 different categories. But the only reason why that child would have done that is because that is really how evolution progressed. Millions of years ago, there was one animal that later became these 2 mollusks, and there was another animal that later became these 2 different vertebrates. That is a real pattern that had existed in nature, and we only reconstruct in our mind. So that is how our consciousness is built out of patterns of the natural world. This is what I think about when I think about these beavers. The moment that you can ask a question about these beavers, that is the moment when they start being special. But the moment that you can ask this question about yourself is when you become special. We are these patterns of nature that we internalize one over another. For example, all we can see in the world is light and dark. And then we see that a few times, and then we absorb that, and we generate this pattern in our mind. We call that a day. And then we have these days that happen to us over and over, and then we notice that some get shorter, and some stay longer, and some are warmer, and some are colder, and we generate this pattern of patterns called year. And that's what we do with our brains. We generate these patterns of patterns of patterns of patterns of the world that really contains those patterns within them. As the world expands, as it moves from the singularity through the Big Bang to the 4 forces, through the origin of the earth, to all the different forms of life, it expands in all directions. And our minds work in the opposite direction. They take patterns of that reality and they compress them into units, and then they compress those into patterns and those into patterns. And the biggest pattern of them all is your consciousness. That consciousness is the singularity of your mind that compresses all of those patterns of the world that have been unfolding from the beginning of the universe into one point in your mind. And it is only from the perspective of that point that you can ponder and appreciate your uniqueness. Only when you can ask the question about what makes me special do you really become special. It is precisely being able to ask that question that makes you different from the rest of the world. And when you see that you are really just an internalization of those patterns of the world, that is when you hear that sound of one hand clapping. Thank you very much.
I thought it was pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you answered all my questions.
Okay. All right. Bye.
So we can just go home.
Okay.
But no, I do have a lot of questions. First of all, it made me, when you were speaking about carbon and oxygen, it reminded me of a very local thing, We used to have a chef here called Julia Child, and there was also a scientist called Phil Morrison. And Phil Morrison got Julia Child to make a beautiful dinner with meat and potatoes and vegetables. And then in the middle of the plate, a bunch of sea salt. And then she made a souffle as well. She put them in the oven and left the oven on for a long time. She brought them out, and all of the food was black, except for the salt. He was trying to show, it was a science show, he was trying to show that everything's made of carbon.
Except salt.
Do you guys remember that? No? Okay.
I do this exercise in class where when we talk about photosynthesis, I take a sandwich, and it can be any sandwich, your favorite sandwich, and then you can deconstruct it. You know, BLT, what is it made of? Bacon, lettuce, tomato, mayo, bread, and then you go bacon, what is the pig made of? Well, the pig ate the corn, so it's made out of corn. The corn is made by photosynthesis, and you do that with every part of it. The only part that's not made by photosynthesis is salt. And that's the only part of the sandwich that's not made by photosynthesis. Not the only thing that's not food.
Yeah, but I like it when you actually burn it. You were talking about burning. Speaking of photosynthesis, in your book, you say that photosynthesis is the greatest invention nature ever made.
Maybe after life itself, it's kind of, you have to have one to get the other, but yeah, photosynthesis is pretty great. I mean, multiple reasons. Literally everything we eat is made by photosynthesis. The sandwich, you can deconstruct every part of it and it will be made by photosynthesis. But then, if that's not enough, oxygen. It didn't have to be with oxygen. There used to be other forms of photosynthesis that didn't make it. And then it transitioned to this new form of photosynthesis. It needs to use this extra molecule. The point of photosynthesis, of course, to take carbon dioxide from the air, inject some energy into it, and cobble it into a sugar that you can later convert into everything else. But you also need this cofactor. You need this extra molecule from which you need to steal an electron. You need to extract that electron from somewhere. And it used to be other things: iron, hydrogen sulfide. And then at one point, this extra molecule became water. And that changes everything, because hydrogen sulfide you have to find. You have to sit by some geyser, and that's the only place where you can photosynthesize, because there's hydrogen sulfide in there.
So sad.
But water is everywhere.
So sad.
So sad, yeah, but a lot of bacteria did that and still doing that apparently. But some have invented this new type of photosynthesis where you use water. And that makes photosynthesis available everywhere. You can live anywhere you want. It's magic. It's just water, air, and light, and you get food out of that. But the side effect is that you get oxygen, this uber-destructive Shiva the Destroyer element that rips everything apart.
The thing we breathe all the time.
Yeah, well, we are the ones who survived it, and 99% of what was alive did not. We're the survivors of that oxygen holocaust, the all burning of the nature at that time.
So here's what I was thinking. What's the worst invention of nature?
What's the worst invention of nature? Ooh, that pushes me firmly into human territory.
Humans.
But I think it becomes less of a question of biology at that point. What's the worst invention? I mean, I am really puzzling over butterflies. Like, I honestly am trying to understand what's going on with lepidopterans. This is a whole chunk of the insect order that distinguishes itself by having these extremely fragile scales on these massive wings. It seems like such a vulnerability. What are you achieving with those wings that you can't achieve with any other wing without having those scales that would be easily rubbed off? I'm sure there's some reason for it, but I don't really understand what it is. Fallopian tubes.
Fallopian tubes?
Another one. I mean, ectopic pregnancy. Why does the thing have to catch the egg when it's released, then it can land on the other side? Why can't it just connect to it and the egg goes right in there, no problem, no, I don't get it.
Sorry. So I just want to, I didn't realize you were funny. So I just want to say that the book has many threads to it. You might not, one thread, it sort of starts at origins of life, and it ends in consciousness. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. And both are these emergent quantities, these emergent effects, we think. And then you also have your life, and you know what you do in your lab throughout. And then you have the entire history of evolution with huge number of...
It's a side story.
It's a thread. Yeah, a huge, beautiful side story with a lot of things. If you read it, if you remembered all those things and you ever had problems at cocktail parties, you could just pull one out of... I mean, it is the best cocktail party book.
Thank you.
Anyhow, the point of the question was... The point of the question was, what do you think about emergence? You define it in your book, and you seem to believe it's relevant.
Yeah.
And you say that sort of sentences are emergent, and they're just not a bunch of words. They're words that you put together and somehow meaning comes out. So that's the emergent property. So I just wanted...
Yeah, so emergence is this very general concept that a whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And there's lots of non-biological things that are emergent. It's not that biology invented emergence. Like I show this cartoon in class from Ratatouille, where a rat has these two different flavors. There's a cheese, there's a strawberry, and it's really cool how in Ratatouille they visualize these tastes as images, as colors, and then you put them together, and this new, totally different flavor that's not just the sum of the two, but something completely different comes out. That's what emergence is. So it describes many systems that are not biological, but it also can be a strategy in evolution. Emergence can be your way out of a situation where all the other evolutionary possibilities seem exhausted. When there's no further place to go in evolution, when all the niches have been covered and all the options have been taken, you can use emergence and create something new and introduce this new dimension into the playing field. And so that happens in one of my favorite parts of History of Life on Earth. It's one of my favorite chapters. I don't think it gets enough attention, maybe because it's a little more complicated, maybe because it's microscopic and you know there's no dinosaurs yet. But it's one of my favorite parts of the History of Life, because I think that's the point when this emergence really becomes the principle of how we move forward. And that's what happened with the domain of eukaryotes. Domain of eukaryotes, there's three domains in life. There's bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes. Most things that we care about, plants, animals, fungi, algae, they're all eukaryotes. But there's actually a pretty small sliver of diversity of life on Earth. So there's a very special domain that is very different from the other two. But the thing is that if you look into the cells of an alga and a ciliate stentor or an animal or an amoeba, all of these totally different eukaryotes that we think of as completely different organisms, their cells are actually remarkably similar to one another. Yes, they have small differences, each one has evolved small tweaks, but really basically the foundation of what a cell is the same. And what that means is that all of these different branches of our domain, plants and animals and single-celled ciliates, they were basically done evolving their cells before those branches came apart. They were already done with their cells. And to this day, there's only very small tweaks that have been introduced to that general design. And so what happened was, we think of multicellularity as this achievement. We won evolution and we became multicellular. Great. It's not necessarily better to be multicellular. That's what you do when you have run out of options. When every other possibility has been taken by bacteria, you grow these enormous bloated bodies that take so much energy and are so vulnerable and so easily to extinguish, to die out. So it's really not an advantage to be multicellular. And but that's a strategy. It's a strategy that you can employ when there's nothing else left. You can add components. You can stop doing things with your cell, and you can start doing things out of combinations of cells. You can move on to the next level of emergence and continue your evolution in this totally new dimension. So that happened to eukaryotes, and the reason I think it's so significant is because eukaryotes then continue to use this emergence to create more and more complex things. It's just part of what they keep introducing into the equation. Like animals do that all the time. A coral, for example, it's 2 levels of emergence. It's, each individual polyp, each individual little bit of that coral is an animal. It's already multicellular and already consists of thousands of, maybe millions of cells. Probably not millions. But then there's thousands of these polyps around the coral. It's the next level of emergence. So eukaryotes, including animals, use emergence to advance, to create these forms of life that are on a different level of complexity. And isn't that what we are doing with our society as well? We think about our even the words natural, artificial. They're the opposites. But why do we think of artificial as something that's distinct from natural? Why do we think of our society as not the continuation of the same trajectory that's been around for billions of years?
So you're saying that you think that what is emerging now is our culture. So
Yeah.
we're still evolving.
I think so.
So I have 2 questions. Like, I thought we already were still evolving, just not culturally, but physically. And
You think we're done evolving, or are we?
no, I don't think I didn't think we were done evolving.
Where do you think we'll go?
Well, you're saying there's one. I don't know. I don't know. But you're saying that the evolution might be like, I work on an experiment with 3,000 people. Maybe that's the future. Maybe that's the evolution, or maybe. I don't know what you think the future of evolution is.
There's this principle in biology that I quote in the book. It's called Orgel's second rule. There's a first rule, but it's less known. The second rule is evolution is cleverer than you are. And it's not a joke. You laugh, but it's not a joke. When you're working on anything related to evolution, that's what you gradually realize. Anything you think evolution can't do or must do or should do, or that's probably a mistake. You're probably wrong about that, and evolution is cleverer.
So AI, do you think that's going to...
Is that our next phase of our evolution?
Yeah. Or will it affect our evolution?
I think it will definitely affect our evolution. I don't want to say that that's the next step, because that sounds ominous, because that sounds like we will be replaced. I like to believe that we will be complemented by these wonderful assistants that will extend our human cognition that we've accumulated over billions of years and expressed in our language. And now we have these further extensions of all of that continuation in the form of AI. And I hope to see something more benevolent than just the replacement of a biological life form with a metal life form or a silicon life form.
Silicon life form.
Yeah.
We had a man in the audience a few days ago ask a question about the fact that we don't have a good theory of the beginning of the universe. And he asked whether evolutionarily we weren't made for that, for answering that question. We were good for eating, bloating. We were good for, certain things, but not for figuring out the beginning of the universe. But you actually said something more upbeat, which is interesting, I think. You think that we're just like we've always been, grumpy and not satisfied with not knowing more. Is that right?
Well, yes. I talk about the reward system and its evolutionary origins, and how it's a temptation to assume that the reason we always seem to want the wrong things, right? You always want the wrong food. You want what you don't have. You're jealous. You're greedy. It always seems like we want something that we shouldn't be wanting, and the temptation is to assume that it's because something's wrong with our lives. That we live this modern life that's so unnatural and counter to how we evolved, And if we just went back to the hunter-gatherer times, well, then we would all just be blissful and eating nuts and berries with plenty of fiber, and there's no kings, so there's no hierarchy, there's no drugs, no addiction, no jobs, no jealousy, everybody's blissful. Well, it wasn't like that because our brains hasn't changed that much since then. It takes a lot longer to change any part of your brain. And what we know is that our brains do this to us as a design, as a feature. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Our brains are designed to take any surprise, anything unexpectedly good, and make that your expectation, so that without that thing that you used to be surprised about, now you feel worse than you used to before you knew that the thing was in the picture. That's how our reward system works. That's the point. The point is to take that and get more. Because if you imagine two animals in the jungle, one that is perfectly content with everything, eats 2 blades of grass and is satisfied, and the other one is never satisfied, that always wants more, that hoards food, that always looks for more opportunities, eventually some disaster is going to strike and then one of these animals will die. And the one that's been hoarding will end up surviving. So it's a useful system as far as our survival is concerned. And evolution really doesn't care about whether we are grumpy or happy. That we have to figure out for ourselves. And I think that we can figure this out and understand it using our knowledge of neuroscience. And I think it makes you a happier person. I think it makes you...
I like how your facial expression was the happier. Sorry. But what, you think that's why we do science?
That's why we do everything.
Well, everything and science.
Well, science presumably brings us some sort of joy, some kind of novelty. It gives us this mystery. It gives us some sense of something to pursue. And that is all what that reward system does. The reward system, the way that it works is it identifies something that your model of the world, something that it disagrees with. Whether it's in your thoughts or in the outside world, it is looking for disagreements between reality and your expectation. And when it finds that disagreement, it drives you to resolve it. It drives you to resolve it, and that's how we're driven to watch movies or to hang out with our friends. But it's also what drives us to research and do science, just maybe on a different level. These disagreements with reality that we find, they are on a higher level of abstraction than maybe we encounter in everyday life.
So do you think drugs would help?
Well, it depends on what kinds of drugs.
Well, I mean, this experience, this idea of the coming together of information we receive and the experience we have. Mm-hmm. When we're looking at the world, you sort of mention in your book that maybe we should understand reality better. Maybe we should be Buddhists.
Well...
Are you a Buddhist?
Oh, I consider myself a sort of practical Buddhist. I'm not quite ready to give up all my desires, but I think about dopamine, which I think really is the fundamental premise of Buddhism. It is about dopamine. It is about attachment to desire leads to suffering. It is that same thing that I just described. Anything that you want, when you don't have it, you will suffer. And why do you want it? Well, because something good has happened to you in the past, something unexpected. You will start wanting it automatically if something unexpected has happened, something good has happened to you. It's really the same premise, and I think of dopamine in similar ways, maybe not quite as categorical. I like to think of dopamine as money, as a salary. I think it's a useful, practical way to think about this. Imagine that you are getting only so much dopamine from your brain per day, per week, per month. And you need that dopamine for 2 things. You need it to reward yourself, you use it to reward yourself. You use it anytime something good happens. But you also need it to motivate yourself. And so if you used up all your dopamine on something very, very, very exciting, then you won't have as much saved up to motivate yourself to do something hard. And you can use that logic. You can't get away from it. There's nothing that you can do about it. But what you can do is you can balance the budget. You can sometimes throw all your dopamine into one big party, and that's okay, and you can have the time of your life, and you can just be prepared that for the next few days you won't have as much dopamine. Everything will be a little bit gray. It will be harder to motivate yourself. Maybe just don't plan something particularly important for those days that requires a lot of work.
But we can't hoard dopamine.
Well, we can also save it up. We can reduce this hum of stimulation. Maybe don't go out as many times. Maybe put your phone down, turn the TV off, ignore bright things that are flashing in front of your eyes. Do that for a few days. You'll be bored. You'll have to suffer through it. There's no hack. The amount of suffering, the boredom, is proportional to how good you will later feel about simpler things, about how motivating will reading a book be, or just walking in the park.
So you talk about, you talk about asking yourself questions. Sometimes you ask yourself questions that seem like the hard problem of consciousness. Like, for instance, you talk about a cobra, which has a hood, has a face, and then it has a hood, and on the hood are some eyes and a nose looking the other way. And you ask yourself, does the cobra know they're there?
Yeah.
And then you feel good. That's a little bit of dopamine, just asking the question. Is that right?
Yeah, well, because dopamine is not necessarily about what's happening to you physically. You can get dopamine out of thoughts. I love watching cooking shows. It's the strangest thing in the world. You can't smell or taste that food, and somehow you're still watching it and it's enjoyable. Because you can replay things in your mind. You can simulate them. And the brain doesn't even always know, is this a simulation or is it really happening? We're never really directly experiencing what is going on. We have this internal model of the world that we're updating with these horribly fragmented, degraded pieces of experience. We move our eyes 4 times a second and get this little bit of an angle to update this internal hallucination that we carry in our mind. So we never really live in the real world. We always inhabit our own internal hallucination.
Okay, well, I won't ask you to solve the hard problem of consciousness, but maybe there would be some audience questions.
Should I call?
Yeah, so thank you so much for the fascinating talk. Do I understand correctly that you define our subjective, conscious experience, our consciousness, as something that emerges from accumulating of all these patterns of nature and evolution?
Yeah, absolutely. Is that sufficient to generate this experience of consciousness that we have? No, I don't think so. I think it involves a specific architecture. I think that to experience what we are experiencing, there needs to be this accumulation of patterns of increasing abstraction, and there needs to be a causal loop. There needs to be this loop between your expectations influencing the input of experience, which influences your expectations, which influences the experience, and this loop, it never ends. It happens, many times a second, and that is what generates our conscious experience, this causal interconnection between levels of abstraction.
Right. So what would you say are the main limitations of this theory? And I know it's a big question, but can you tell us briefly what are the main alternative theories of consciousness and how yours would compare with them?
Well, I think that most theories of consciousness really are talking about the same thing, just from different perspectives. So I think that maybe I'll offend somebody by saying this, but I think the 3 big main theories of consciousness right now are the predictive coding theory, global workspace theory, and integrated information theory. Predictive coding and integrated information theory, from what I understand, are talking about a very similar thing, except predictive coding theory approaches it from the perspective of the brain, what the neurons are doing, how the neurons are interacting with each other, how this neuron predicts what this neuron will tell it. Whereas integrated information theory does that without really a reference to neurons at all. It talks about information in principle, this abstract information, the level of abstraction, and the degree to which one level influences another. That's how I understand this concept of phi, and I really am out of my depth. I'm a chemist. I'm a biochemist. This is a little bit too much philosophy for me, but to the best of my understanding, integrated information theory talks about the information, the software part of what predictive coding theory approaches from the hardware part. That's how I would put it. Global workspace theory, to me, is a little bit more less satisfying. Let's put it that way. We all accept theories that we believe satisfy what the puzzles that we find about whatever phenomenon we're studying. So to me, global workspace theory is less satisfying because it has this element of Cartesian theater, what Daniel Dennett calls Cartesian theory. These many theorists of consciousness kind of talk about how consciousness works this thing happens, and this thing happens, and this thing happens, and then somebody views it, somebody sees it. And that's what Dennett calls Cartesian theater. There's this somewhere, it's all connected, but somewhere there's a theater, and somebody's sitting in that theater and watching what's happening on the stage. So I think global workspace theory falls into this trap of Cartesian theory, because its essential point is that distributed information in the brain must be relayed to this global workspace, and then at that point it becomes consciousness. Well, to me, that just bounces the question one step down the line. What is the global workspace theory? What defines the consciousness of that space rather than distributed networks in the brain? And I think that if you trace that question further down logically, you will arrive at predictive coding or integrated information theory. Now, I also think that these theories, they make specific predictions about specific areas of the brain that must be involved. And so, for example, there was a recent paper where global workspace was tested against integrated information theory, and they predefined, they really tried to make it as scientific as possible, to predefine the questions, to decide what outcome counts as what. And in the end, it's still unclear who won. It's still unclear who won, because I think that what they focused on was these very specific predictions about where in the brain this would happen, and that didn't quite pan out the way that they thought it would. Neither side really completely got it. But to me, those predictions about specific brain parts, they're not as important. They're not central. What's central is the conceptual framework, and the conceptual framework, I think, fundamentally is different. Fundamentally is the same in all of them. It is levels of abstraction and this loop of causality. That's how I see it.
Right, so I was just reading your abstract, short abstract. When I look at the end of it, it's a deep continuity between our consciousness and nature itself. I cannot agree with it wholeheartedly. Why? There are different types of consciousness. Francis Crick spent last 20 years of his life working on visual consciousness because there's already a large body of data on that. What's his conclusion? Still open-ended. Well, let's say human perception as part of consciousness. Then I would say there's a discontinuity between human perception and nature itself. What you perceive is not really the whole story in reality. Example, one of the most famous examples would be shooting a cat. Human perception, either the cat is alive or dead, but in reality, it's unknown. Another example, I have to do visualization of 10-dimensionality. Where's 10-dimensional? Well, it's a mathematical. If you agree it's a mathematical reality, then human perception cannot intuitively visualize that high dimensionality. Therefore, I see there's a discontinuity between human perception, which is part of consciousness, and nature itself.
Do you not think that 10-dimensionality exists in nature?
It's a mathematical reality. Maybe, we don't know.
Well, I think that being able to imagine it and being able to conceptualize it and make predictions.
What other high dimensionality? Well, it's part of the core of string theory.
Yeah, and if you can use this 10-dimensionality to predict something about the real world, then I don't see in what way would that not be real, and in what way your understanding it through not direct experience, through math, through your knowledge of science, through everything else that you've learned in your world. I don't see how that could not be thought of as a natural pattern that you have built up in your brain. I don't see how that contradicts that perspective.
Hi, sorry, I'm not a scientist, but I just wanted to inquire if, when you talk about cells having memory, in terms of understanding our evolution and how we get mutations, is that a cell learning a pattern and then deciding to change that pattern, or responding in a different way from its fellow cells? And if so, what causes that differentiation in response? Is that the mystery of our consciousness in a way?
That's a great question. You've basically articulated my grant proposal.
Oh.
Yes, so the nuance is that most things that we look at when we're looking at cellular memory are not genes, or rather not the changes in the genes. That happens over millions of years in the process of evolution. On top of that, each individual, each cell, each organism has learning. That's what happens on top of this genetic memory. You could think of genes as memory as well, just a different kind of memory, a memory that's much longer, that belongs not just to this individual, but to the entire lineage. If you think of it this way, then sure, it's a memory process that the life on Earth has used to optimize its well-being and its survival. We can easily think of it as memory. It's just not always a useful term to apply, and sometimes we like to discriminate between them. As far as what are the individual differences between these cells that determine which ones learn, which ones don't learn, we're very interested in that question. I bet that there are genetic differences that can determine that. And we study specific things that these cells learn. What we've established is that they can discriminate between patterns. I said that, it's all patterns of chemicals. You give them these chemicals at different times. And apparently these cells, they can distinguish between these patterns on surprisingly fine time scales, minutes. If 4 pulses of 3 minutes is different, much more strong effect than a single 12-minute pulse. So they can tell this difference in just minutes. What determines that they can tell it? One cell is able to tell it really well. Another cell, it doesn't notice that difference. There are some occasional cells that we see that have the reverse pattern, that they react more strongly to this longer-lasting pulse. Most would react to this spaced stimulation. What determines this? We're yet to find out, and maybe these differences between individual cells would also point to differences in individual humans. Maybe the genes that will help one cell remember or discriminate patterns better than another cell, maybe those same genes would relate to human intelligence or abstract thinking or ability to discriminate one sequence from another. We don't know yet. Ask me in 2 years.
Hi, my name is Angelina. It's nice to meet you. You somewhat answered this question, but I was curious. You spoke a bit about this active memory that we can recall through the top-down approach, and I was wondering what exactly contributes to that memory. Can we parse that? There are neurons, there are cells in the brain, cells in the kidneys. What exactly is causing that active memory?
Well, when we refer to the memory, this in the everyday language, what we call a memory, when you close your eyes, you think about something that happened to you. In neuroscience, we would call that an episodic memory. It's a specific type of memory. And what it is basically a hyperlink to a state of your brain in a particular moment of time. So you are in a particular moment, and you're hearing some music, and you're smelling some smell, and you're meeting this person. All of those things happen to you in other situations as well. You've heard that song before, you've smelled that coffee, you've met that person. But this memory that you will form about that moment is the fact that those 3 things happened at the same time. And they'll be processed by different parts of your cerebral cortex. That's kind of the thinking part. Again, I might offend some neuroscientists here by saying that cortex is the thinking part. Other parts are thinking too. But the cortex is the most the part with which you perceive reality. So it perceives that sound, it processes what that song is, it processes who that person is, deconstructs the smells, and all of that is done in different parts of the cortex, and they all send a signal into hippocampus, which is this like addendum to the cortex. On the side, it's kind of a fold of the cortex. And so this hippocampus binds these signals into one. There are specific neurons that strengthen the connections with all of these incoming signals, and so the signals become bound with each other. And then later, when you're hearing that song, you're just pulling on one of the strings and you are reactivating all the others. It goes into that hyperlink, and then it pings the cortex, and the cortex re-experiences the things that it has been experiencing in the moment. It's not an exact copy. Of course, it's not the same as experiencing it in real life, but it's trying to emulate parts of what it did in that moment. So that's an episodic memory. It's a connection between simultaneous parts of experience.
Well, that was pretty cool. Yeah. I hope you'll buy the book. And not just buy it. Actually, you could steal it, but you could read it. I
recommend.
Yeah, I recommend it.
I read it.
Thank you very much.
A huge thank you to Nikolay Kukushkin and Melissa Franklin for speaking with us tonight.